In this video, we're going to think about the degree to which governments can address and counter some of the problems of a free market approach to the media, through measures such as public service broadcasting and regulation. As Chris Rudd explains, the aim of public service broadcasting is to address market failings by providing all citizens, regardless of status, wealth or location, with access to information of an educational value. This information may help promote awareness of a national identity and the diversity of viewpoints in society, and foster social cohesion. An example of such public service broadcasting would be the BBC in the UK, whose role it is to inform, educate and entertain the British public, and which is funded by a licence fee that the public pays of £154 a year, about $300 per household. The channel does not carry any advertising, and its public funding is seen to free it from commercial pressures which might limit its ability to programme content which is of educational value, or which might limit its ability to address and represent Britain in all its diversity. In New Zealand, TVNZ used to be funded through a licence fee, but became increasingly dependent upon advertising as well, and the licence fee was abolished in 1999. The Labour government introduced a public service charter for TVNZ in 2003 and some small funding to support this. But given that the channel was still at least 90% dependent on advertising, it became difficult to fulfil the aims of the charter, and the national government ended the charter and the funding in 2011. TVNZ is thus now a fully commercial enterprise, even though it's still government owned. The government does provide some funding for New Zealand-specific programming through the agency New Zealand On Air. However, in order to get funding from New Zealand On Air, a television programme must have a broadcaster or website that's prepared to screen it. Thus, questions of the attractiveness of the programme to advertisers come into play from the very beginning in terms of what gets funded. New Zealand On Air does wholly fund Radio New Zealand though, consisting of the channels RNZ National and RNZ Concert. Māori TV, launched in 2004, is also subsidised by the government and does have a public service remit, though its obligation to inform, educate and entertain must be balanced with the obligation to broadcast mainly in the Māori language and to consider the needs of children participating in immersion education and anyone else learning Māori. As vital as it is then, its remit somewhat narrows its scope. Public service broadcasting in New Zealand is thus very limited and fragmentary. In response to this situation, in 2020, the New Zealand government proposed to establish a new public broadcaster to be formed out of the merger of TVNZ and RNZ. However, questions currently remain regarding the exact degree to which this new entity would be publicly funded and/or commercially funded. Earlier tensions regarding the relationship between TVNZ's public and commercial objectives may thus return. Whilst part of the rationale behind this proposal has been to establish a more major public broadcaster to tackle the challenge of global players such as Facebook and Netflix, merging TVNZ and RNZ is also likely to lead to a centralisation of news gathering services and thus a reduction in the range of local news providers. Furthermore, unsurprisingly, those working in the local commercial sector have criticised the government for responding to the challenge of global media in this way, as they feel they will struggle even more, unable to compete with the likes of Netflix or this new public broadcaster not beholden to commercial realities to the same extent as them. Indeed, key players in the commercial sector are particularly bitter given the Commerce Commission's rejection of the proposed merger of Stuff and NZME and the proposed merger of Sky and Vodafone, both in 2017. These companies also frame their mergers as an attempt to tackle the challenge of powerful global media. But the Commerce Commission felt that the resulting concentration of ownership would diminish the plurality of voices in New Zealand news media. Despite the deregulation of the media in the 1980s then, these government interventions in funding and regulation show that New Zealand media is not a completely free market. How necessary these interventions are is something we can discuss in the forums this week.